Welcome to the MSDW podcast. I'm Jason Gumpert, editor at msdynamicsworld.com, and this is another episode of our Dynamics AX to Dynamics 365 Finance and Operations Upgrade series, and I'm joined once again by Peter Jekyll of Turn On Dynamics. Hey, Peter.
How's it going today, Jason? I'm excited today. I think we got a good one.
It's going well. Yeah, I am too. We are talking to Glenn McPeak from Data Masons, and how does this fit into the series? Because this one really was. I would give you credit for coming up with this particular episode's theme.
You know, it's odd because ISV solutions, almost every implementation has one or many more ISVs, right? But you kind of seem to forget about that. They're out there, right? And so we've been having all these conversations with customers and experts, and all this and prospects, and the ISVs, just totally slipped out of my mind. And there was this kind of recent incident with an implementation that really forced it to the front. And in conjunction with the call we had with the folks from Microsoft, where we asked them, what are the top considerations, for people to look at when doing one of these upgrades, and their top two were look at how heavy, how heavy your modifications are and how many ISVs you have. So I guess, we figured maybe we better get some of those guys on and figure out what it is that they're seeing behind the scenes.
Yeah, we linked back to that in the recent article that you posted, sort of in combination with this episode, and I went back and checked the podcast, and there it was, clear as day. Number one, when you asked them straight up, and number one, the answer was, yep, customizations, and two is ISV solutions. It's like, okay, and I had sort of gone out of my mind at that point, but you're right. So, yeah, I mean, so Glenn, I think is a great person to talk to. Hopefully, we'll do more of these in the future as well. But let's take a listen. Well, hey, Glenn, welcome to the podcast. Thanks for being here with me and Peter.
Thank you. It's a great pleasure.
As we get started, maybe we should sort of frame up what we want to talk about. Obviously, upgrades are a big topic in the Dynamics AX community these days. I mean, they have been for definitely a year, probably 2 years, but I think the conversation's only really starting to heat up now. And as Peter and I have done really a series of kind of conversations with different elements of the I guess the community, the AX community, for everyone from users to partner to VARs to Microsoft themselves. Well, I think one thing we haven't really done is talk directly to ISVs in the space who have a real stake and a real influence in this overall conversation. Peter, do you agree with me? Is that kind of the gist of things here?
Yeah, good talking to you again, Jason, and Glenn. Thank you very much for being here. Really appreciate the time. As we've been undertaking these projects and talking to folks and trying to get some good information out there, one of the things that even Microsoft, their engineers pointed out was that when we asked them, what are the biggest things they wanted customers to look at in regards to, red flags for doing these upgrades, was the number of modifications, obviously. But then I think number two on their list, or tied for number one, was how many ISVs they had. And we've taken a lot of that stuff for granted a bit. But then I thought about it, and the first ISV experience that I had in working with an upgrade was a really, really good company. Their solution, is fantastic, and they're, good guys to work with, got a great reputation, everything's good. And when we asked them to quote the upgrade, their upgrade pricing was multiples of doing a reimplementation, because they said, this is such a moving target that we don't want to commit to a upgrade of our solution, the way you're doing the upgrade here, and we just rather do a reimplementation. And so that really shocked me. And so I figured, we better talk to some folks that have to live this day in, day out, and find out what their experience is, behind the scenes.
Maybe I could just add one other thing, and I think it's a really good reason that Glenn is the guest here, kind of sharing an ISV perspective. And then Glenn, we will eventually let you talk too. But I just know from knowing Glenn and Data Masons, you've been talking about AX upgrades and thinking about it for a long time, and maybe we could start off by getting a little more from you about that. I mean, from my outside perspective, it certainly seems like that's been something that your team has taken very seriously from day one.
Well, certainly, and very much so. So my background goes far back in time and centered in the ERP space. And a long time ago, I was involved in ERP systems that were written in COBOL, and the only way that you could make them do what you wanted was to embed customizations inside the code. And I learned a long time ago that that is a very tough road to go down and maintain compatibility with new releases, because you have to reintegrate your code. I started working with Dynamics AX in year 2000, so now 19 years. And even at that point in time, with the amazing ability to customize that platform, you just intuitively know that doing what I would call gratuitous customizations in there was, while exciting and sexy and great for customers to be amazed at, it also would have a downstream impact on their ability to move to new versions. And that's just, based on the experience at that time. So now 19 years into this journey, we've seen so many companies stuck on very old and dated versions of, AX that is no longer supported by Microsoft. And so they're in a quandary. And now we've moved into 2019, and Dynamics 365 is a completely different model in that not only are upgrades, they're not like they were in the past, which was infrequent and very hard to do, but now they're continuous and they require ongoing compatibility with new updates and releases by Microsoft. So many years ago, as you observed, Jason, we adopted an external model that didn't rely on embedded customizations to do what we do best, which is to get data into the Dynamics platform where it needs to be, perfectly formed, following the company's business rules, and then proactively getting data out and transforming it with all the business rules processing based on partners' requirements to give them what they need and follow their business rules. And so that approach has really enabled our customers to kind of stay out of the fray of dealing with at least embedded customizations for the type of functionality that we deliver. And in that, the model has now, the paradigm has shifted to where most partners and even ISVs, they only saw one way to do it, and that was to embed their code inside the ERP, which, as Peter mentioned a few minutes ago, creates a big challenge in for future. So it may be appealing and path of least resistance early on, but later on it can cause great amount of angst. So we found that our model, and I'm 1000% convinced and always will be, that by doing what we do best outside, continually improving our platform, making it better, and maintaining compatibility with the lightest footprint inside of Dynamics is the best model. And I think other ISVs are following suit.
Hey, Glenn, I got a question for you on this. Do ISVs currently kind of fall into these two camps, embedded versus outside, or are you kind of unique? or are you unique because of the type of ISV solution you have?
Well, if you go out to AppSource, I can see a lot of ISVs that are, they have very little embedded code inside of it. And I think that those types of ISVs are increasing because Microsoft has a much better integration framework in Dynamics 365. It's much more open to external solutions. And so now we can embed links inside of Dynamics that opens up screens with contextual data in our platform, and it looks just like it's embedded, but it's not. And I haven't explored every ISV solution out there, but I've got to believe that they're taking a similar approach. But there's many, what I call legacy partners that deliver their code as embedded, and in some cases you have to have it. It's very core to the ERP. But in terms of what we do, we can do all the machinations outside and then deliver it the way the customer wants. The Dynamics 365 user wants. So I think, yes, there are two camps. They're very distinct, and I see it evolving more towards the external than the embedded model.
So you made a really great point there. You were able to look at AppSource and kind of classify the solutions being embedded versus outside, right?
Correct.
How do I do that if I am, the AX customer, the 2009 AX customer that has 4 or 5 critical ISV solutions, and I want to know, which one of my ISVs, falls into which camp, so that I can kind of judge what I'm facing here?
Well, I'd like to believe that they're going to be very explicit in their approach. We certainly always, we make it clear within the first couple sentences that we're not embedded, that we're customized, and others are, very clear that they are embedded. Others kind of leave you wondering, but, we know the market. I know the market pretty well, so I know who's kind of, who does what. So there's no definitive answer other than to explore the supporting literature very carefully.
So the takeaway is to publish your cell phone number for people to call to identify these. Is that correct?
Yes, or your Twitter or your Instagram.
All right. Thank you, sir.
Glenn, how does this tie into to what partners are doing when they're kind of they're dealing maybe face to face with AX users who are looking at or assessing an upgrade? How does your role tend to fit in there as an ISV? Is it different engagements depending on the customer, or are you doing a lot of reseller coaching and anything else like that?
Well, we work with partners in a very similar manner as we have in the past, because our model has changed very little. From, let's say, the Dynamics AX era to the Dynamics 365, because we've remained external. And as a result, they can define the business process and the solution model. And once that's defined, most of the partners we work with, they say, okay, here's the model, here's where this data needs to go, here are the endpoints, and here's how the customer is using the system, so that we know where to get the data and on what timing. And so it was similar to that in the AX market. And so by and large, we're engaging in a very similar manner, because again, we don't have to hand them a big set of code for them to integrate into other ISVs, so it hasn't changed all that much for us.
Another question I had, something you mentioned earlier, with the improved sort of integration framework or integration tools that that are part of F&O. My recollection on that was that there were some real complaints about it in the very early days of F&O, that the integration tooling wasn't there. But I thinking back now, I don't really know exactly how it's evolved. Can you talk a little more about your experience with that? Because I mean, clearly you're saying it's working for your needs now. Has it always been there, or has it been a process?
Well, for one thing, they completely changed the tools for integration when they went from AX to Dynamics 365. So historically, you had application integration framework and business connector. When they released Dynamics 365, they deprecated both of those frameworks, and they introduced a new framework, which is the based on OData and RESTful web services. So certainly, if you built your model to be heavily reliant on those integration frameworks, and it wasn't loosely coupled to the extent that you could then turn your connectivity over to the new framework, you would definitely have a lot of work to do. On our end, it was relatively easy. So that would be the primary complaints that I think people would have. Now, there, of course, Microsoft, when they released Dynamics 365, there was a lot of change in it, a lot of new things, and Microsoft has been evolving some of those issues. But today, at the current release level that we're at, the framework is very robust, very solid, gives us excellent feedback when issues occur, failures or other type of circumstances that are of interest. But it's also quite scalable, so we can really push a lot of transactional data into it very, very quickly. If you're not good at getting the data right before you send it over and you're just generating tons of errors, then it would be a disappointment. But if you can get the data into a state that it can flow in with relatively few errors, then the framework is a panacea.
So early on, Glenn, we a lot of the upgrades that were pushed out on on the D365 platform, we literally heard stories where those blew away, modifications, ISV connectors, solutions, etc. Where has that come, and how stable is the platform now, as far as you guys having to go in and monitor when these upgrades come up and make sure that nothing's broken?
Well, from our perspective, we've always adhered to the use of the data entity framework with the OData endpoints. And our solution has been largely, not impacted. I mean, probably only one update had an impact, and it was really just it was security related that took a little time to get resolved. But we have not lost anything, where it's deprecated. But I have heard that from a number of companies that are trying to use the logic app integrations. A lot of that was getting deprecated as the platforms evolved. So that might have been what you're
referring to or heard stories about?
It might be, yes, yeah. Because we just spoke to one of the largest companies in Australia about a month ago, and they complained how updates were wiping out their efforts, and they were at their wits' end with it, and they were using logic apps.
From a standpoint of the the in-house guys that have, worked with AX over the years, and, they've developed this skill set around SQL and a certain amount of tools, right? When they start thinking, oh my God, we have to move to this new environment and we have to completely rethink, how we work stuff. As somebody that works with this technology on a day-to-day basis, and from those guys that are starting to stick their toe, into the water of this D365 platform, what tools, what technologies, what stuff would you go out, to start looking at and become expert at in-house, to be able to make this kind of transition?
Sure, that's a really good question, and we've traveled that journey, and certainly, initially we were a little bit we struggled with inability to access SQL and see what was going on inside the platform. So some of the tools that we rely on are applications or test tools like Fiddler that let us see what's happening with the web service traffic, as well as other types of tools that enable us to see what's happening in the handshaking of the data with the web services. So that's a primary tool that we rely on for our purposes. In some, in the test environments, you do have access to SQL if you need to look at what's happening on the back end. But once you go into production, you lose access to that information, and then you have to start using other mechanisms for it.
I'm interested in that a little more from your perspective, because Peter, I'm thinking back to when we heard from the Fast Track team and some of the steps that they go through with a client to get them to a live state from, and I guess, kind of moving through the various environments and verifying various elements of the performance and the, architecture. Glenn, do you see that from your side? Does your team kind of have to be part of those launches to some degree as an add-on provider, I guess you'd say, that's kind of part of that team in some sense of each customer that goes live? Because it sounded like from the Microsoft perspective, they're really, they're going to call out any issue or any element of that overall solution architecture as part of the sort of the final approval process from their side.
Well, absolutely. What we do is mission critical. So we've got to support our customers when they're taking new updates, because it doesn't matter if there is an issue, where the issue is coming from. It's all hands on deck to make sure that these updates go well and successfully. So we definitely work with the customers. We're also obligated, because we're certified for Dynamics solution, to recertify every 3 months with Microsoft, which is a big, undertaking and unto itself. But it also keeps us diligent on making sure that everything we do is in sync with the changes that Microsoft introduces.
Yeah, Glenn, one of the things that really surprised us is that the amount of Azure expertise that was required in executing upgrades. We figured, everything would be taken care of inside of LCS. But in reality, we really had to step outside and find Azure expertise. And the thing that we found very interesting was that, we would try to find, who's the best Azure guy that, you can recommend so that we can bring him on this project. And then we would find those resources and we would ask them about D365F&O, and they would say, what are you talking about? Have you found that same thing, that you've had to, and have you had to develop your own internal Azure expertise? And, how hard is that?
It's it's exactly as you said. You have to understand how Azure is architected. You have to understand the the impact of the various levels of platform and its impact on performance. We've seen a few projects where they've seen slowness in the test environment, but assume that once they go into production on the higher level platform, that everything will be okay. But they don't really fully understand the how scalability works when you go across platforms. So Azure expertise is very critical, and we've done a lot to beef up our internal staff in that regard.
This one may be, I don't know, this one may be an easy one to answer, but is there more of a role for EDI in just the pure upgrade process than just the final state solution? Does it actually play a role in any of the upgrade work the companies are going through, Glenn?
That's a great question. And we just had that conversation yesterday with one of our biggest customers that's migrating to Dynamics 365. And what we told them is that they shouldn't just look at the EDI portion of the project as being, the ancillary, okay, let's make sure EDI works, but let's, we've got to do all this unit testing and CRP and UAT over here. We said to them, because virtually all the critical business processes are related to EDI, and that they can use EDI for stress testing on the system, for data validation, because they're doing a data migration process, shedding a lot of customizations and tables, as well as proving out the business process, etc. And one great thing about EDI is that we know, if you think of it like an algebra equation, we know what the input is, and we know what the result needs to be, because we have both the input and the result in a digitized format today. So we can run the same transactions through the system and validate it down to the byte. And that's a really great tool for companies to uncover surprises before they go live.
On all these projects that you've been on, are there any tips that you recommend for customers that are undergoing, that are taking a look at these projects? What do you see as the big tips you would give folks? Maybe gotchas or things that you normally wouldn't think about.
Well, interestingly enough, we're going to be doing a presentation on this at the upcoming summit, and the number one conversation, and I'm sure you've had these conversations before with companies that are going from AX to Dynamics 365, is what customizations do we have that we really need when we go to Dynamics 365? So it's a complete reevaluation of what they created, why they created it, and whether they really need it, or if there's native functionality that's been added to the platform that meets those needs. So evaluating that, I think, is first and foremost. And the other thing I'll just say is that these projects are a big challenge, of course, on resources and time and company. And there's got to be a reason for it, and there's got to be an economic value to it. And so to me, the term digital transformation means improving your business, improving your efficiency. So I think that people need to look at how is this going to improve what we do? You could say, well, we're going to a browser and we're getting the servers out of our building, and all that's good and that's great. But I think, what about driving the value of the business? Increasing efficiency, lowering costs, reducing errors, connecting, the value chain. So that's where we approach it, is not just checkbox upgrade.
Yeah, one of the surprising things we found was that just instead of that linear, move from version A to version B, was that we actually talked to some pretty significant large companies that have the ability to do these upgrades, financially and internally, as far as the resources are concerned. But their decision was, look, what we're going to do is we're going to upgrade to R3 and stabilize and figure out what's going on there before we decide later on, maybe a year, 2, 3 years down the road that we're going to go to D365. Have you found that as well?
Not so much. I think that if you're going to invest the effort, it's wiser to go to Dynamics 365 because you can run it on-prem as well as in the Microsoft cloud. So there isn't a huge advantage to using AX 2012 R3. I can understand it on one hand, but Dynamics 365 is much more extensible and much more flexible for integration and accessibility on various devices. So, I haven't seen a lot of people migrating just to R3, let's say in the last 12 months.
Well, one thing that has kind of bugged me from some of one of the past was it one or two of the past episodes of the series that we've done, and I'll share it with you, Glenn, is some AX customers we've talked to who really sort of felt like they were a little hamstrung and that they didn't have that the scope of a F&O upgrade was just too big for their size of a company. They're sort of this profile that we've sort of described before of these companies that bought into AX, haven't really grown to sort of, I guess, see all the value. I mean, they've gotten value out of AX, but maybe haven't grown to become a larger company that could be, like to Peter's point, could afford a big upgrade, expensive upgrade. And they're a little bit stuck right now, and they don't know what to do. And I to your point about really making a move to F&O more transformational or more, I guess, strategic. I have to think that that's what, if those companies are going to get out of their legacy kind of situation that they find themselves in, especially if they're on old versions, they're going to have to make some kind of a decision like that. If an upgrade is going to be possible, because Peter, I still think back to some of the customers we heard from, and I felt like we almost left those conversations a bit unresolved. Like it's not clear what some of them are going to do yet.
Yeah, some of them have, and some of them are still thinking. They haven't made a decision.
Well, we've seen, I had a conversation recently with a customer who was a very large account of ours but decided for that one division to go to NetSuite. And it's been a disaster ever since because NetSuite did not have the capabilities of AX 2009, which is where they were migrating from. And so the one thing about, considering, do I stay on this legacy AX or do I go to something else, is not to, even if you're a small company, you could be using important features in it that you rely on. And it's really important to say, hey, do I want to go to a, quote, a smaller system that might be a better fit for me, but in reality, even though you're not a large company, the functionality you're using is significant, and it's much more difficult to move from AX to some other platform than it is to move up to Dynamics 365. Because by and large, the data model is very similar, and although there are, of course, functional differences and capabilities, those things can be turned on and off. And I think the main thing is to really evaluate the customizations that you may have engaged in and really say, did we really need that? Was there a purpose to it? And can we do it without going into, and I think that makes it a little bit easier than, say, switching platforms or staying on, AX 2009 or AX4 for the next 10 years. I don't think is a good play either. So I think those are things that people got to really look at and, go beyond, size and that sort of thing.
I think the last thing I have is like more of a comment than a question. When we got into the AX world, it was this, this kind of magic new, piece of software that was kind of sold as a, blank sheet of paper where you could do anything, right? Make any kind of modifications that you needed as a business, that it was very open. It was easy to make these modifications. And the way the system under the hood handled those modifications was far superior than any other software that you've ever seen. And it seems to me that the D365 things are much more difficult to get your hands on. And I understand that because of, having to run all these different companies in the cloud in some economical fashion. But it's almost like it's not the same product, right? It's different, right? Do you have that same sense, or how do you feel about it?
I think that the approach is different. I think that the product under the hood is very similar, but the idea that you take this thing, you bring it into your environment, and then you do anything you want to it, and it doesn't matter if it's best practice or not, just code away on it. That's the big change. You cannot do that in Dynamics 365. It's got to be done, surgically. You have to follow best practice, and otherwise, both Microsoft, the partner, and the Dynamics 365 user is going to suffer. And I think that that's the big shift between the two of them. You could get away with anything in AX, and now in Dynamics 365, you've got to really follow proper practice.
It almost requires you to be an adult ERP user.
Yes, you have to really think through what you're doing, and you have to use resources that are quite, skilled at it, and it limits your options. You're right about that. You are limited in terms of how far you can, make changes.
Another thing I was thinking of just that came up recently was this announcement Microsoft made that they're going to be sort of separating out, in terms of pricing and packaging, separating out financials and supply chain in what we've been calling F&O. I was just thinking about it, and it seems like that could touch on EDI. Does that make things really any significantly different from your perspective, with either from your side and supporting it, or in terms of explaining to users what they really need?
It hasn't been a significant thing that's changed for us. So
It also hasn't gone into effect yet.
yeah, no, that's true. But yeah, so we don't see it as a real big change for us.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Okay, but Glenn, with the changes coming to the ISV space from Microsoft, with new policies, new co-sell and co-market programs, any predictions on how that will impact the F&O space and the ISVs in that space?
Well, the one impact I see is that Microsoft is serious about growing their Dynamics 365 business, and they recognize that ISVs have an important role in that. And Peter and I have been in this industry for a long time, so we've seen companies that have been apathetic to ISVs, hostile, but and then also promoting them. So Microsoft is kicking that into high gear to really help deliver true solutions to customers. And we're part of the co-sell and the One Commercial Partner Program. And we see that as enabling their internal team, and as well as the reselling partners, to be able to bring a solution to a customer that's complete. It's not just, hey, yeah, we've got these three things, but there are two things that are missing, and let's build it. Instead, now they can go with complete solution sets, and I see that as being very positive for ISVs as well as very positive for the Microsoft ecosystem.
All right, great. And in cosell, as I understand, I mean, that's the sort of the highest tier of engagement with Microsoft and their sellers. It's kind of the biggest, I guess, biggest sacrifice or the biggest, potential upfront cost for ISVs. I assume that means you really do expect, a really good result from it, something that will change, sort of change the nature of how you go to market in this space.
That's correct. There's a pros and cons to it. The bar is much higher. It's more difficult, but at the same time, Microsoft has now got a strategy to help us, and help enable us to help them and the partners achieve their objectives. So I think it's just a trade-off. More cost, more effort to get there, but hopefully on the back end we'll see the growth in our business as a result.
All right, great. Only other thing I can think of is just can you give any perspective on maybe like the ratios of companies that are coming to F&O today that are working with data masons that are sort of net new to F&O versus the ones that are upgrading from AX. I'm going on sort of the general assumption I've had that the early days of F&O were largely new implementations, and that really we're just getting to the point where upgrades are going to start becoming a major component of it. Can you shed any light on your observation with that?
Right now, I would say that the projects that we're getting is split down the middle. So 50% of our projects are net new, and 50% are migrations from Dynamics AX.
And as follow-up to that,
you're right. Yeah,
No,
you're
ahead.
right, though. It's growing. It's growing quickly, and I think it's going to accelerate. But go ahead. I'm sorry, Peter.
No, my guess is that the upgrade market from AX to the F&O is a 3 to 5 year window.
Yeah, I think that there's going to be a big push, and as companies hear anecdotal evidence that Dynamics 365 is a good platform and a good model for them to migrate to, the word will spread, and then there's going to be a lot of companies pushing to make that move. And, we already see it. So, and I think we're just at the beginning.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have to think with events in the near future, user group summit and other ones where either AX customers or AX partners are there. What like the state of the sort of upgrade guidance and upgrade tooling has got to be one of the almost more so than maybe F&O features to a large extent, but trying to get updates and reading Microsoft's progress on that's probably going to be one of the top questions people will be asking. Is how quickly they're improving those tools. This has been another episode of the MSDW podcast. My thanks to Glenn McPeak of Data Masons and Peter Jekyll of Turn On Dynamics for being a part of it. If you want to get in touch, you can reach me by email, jgumpert@msdynamicsworld.com. Until next time, this is MS Dynamics World, signing off.